The city of Eco Heights breathed like a living thing, restless and glowing under the weight of its own ambition. Neon lights spilled from high-rise buildings, reflecting on wet asphalt as taxis hissed past and generators hummed like distant drums. Billboards smiled with false promises of success, while above them, the night sky watched silently, heavy with secrets no one dared to confess. In this city, dreams were made quickly and destroyed even faster. At the heart of Eco Heights stood Oduma Towers, a tall, cream-colored apartment complex wedged between a shopping mall and a buzzing expressway. From one of its upper floors, Amara Nwoy stood by the window, her hands resting gently on the glass as she watched the city below. Her face glowed softly in the reflection, youthful and hopeful, her eyes shining with a joy she could barely contain. Tomorrow, she would become a wife, and the thought sent quiet tremors of excitement through her chest. Behind her, the apartment carried the weight of unspoken tension. The living room was neat but cold, decorated with modern furniture that felt more like a showroom than a home. Sitting on the leather sofa was Zainab Nwoy, Amara's elder sister, her posture stiff and her gaze fixed on her phone, though she wasn't reading anything. Every laugh from Amara felt like a slap, every smile like an insult written in bold letters across Zainab's heart. The city of Eco Heights breathed like a living thing, restless and glowing under the weight of its own ambition. Neon lights spilled from high-rise buildings, reflecting on wet asphalt as taxis hissed past and generators hummed like distant drums. Billboards smiled with false promises of success, while above them, the night sky watched silently, heavy with secrets no one dared to confess. In this city, dreams were made quickly and destroyed even faster. At the heart of Eco Heights stood Oduma Towers, a tall, cream-colored apartment complex wedged between a shopping mall and a buzzing expressway. From one of its upper floors, Amara Nwoy stood by the window, her hands resting gently on the glass as she watched the city below. Her face glowed softly in the reflection, youthful and hopeful, her eyes shining with a joy she could barely contain. Tomorrow, she would become a wife, and the thought sent quiet tremors of excitement through her chest. Behind her, the apartment carried the weight of unspoken tension. The living room was neat but cold, decorated with modern furniture that felt more like a showroom than a home. Sitting on the leather sofa was Zainab Nwoy, Amara's elder sister, her posture stiff and her gaze fixed on her phone, though she wasn't reading anything. Every laugh from Amara felt like a slap, every smile like an insult written in bold letters across Zainab's heart. Zainab had always believed life owed her first place. She was the first daughter, the one who sacrificed her youth helping their mother survive the harshness of the city after their father's death. She watched her friends marry one after another while her own relationships crumbled like cheap glass. Now, her younger sister, soft-spoken, gentle Amara, was stepping into marriage before her, and the bitterness sat in Zainab's chest like poison that refused to be swallowed or spat out. From the narrow hallway emerged Mama Ifyananya, their mother, tying the wrapper around her waist with trembling hands. Age had bent her back slightly, but her eyes still carried the wisdom of storms survived and prayers whispered in the dark. She smiled at Amara, blessing her softly, unaware of the shadow thickening behind Zainab's silence. Outside, the city roared on, unaware that within Oduma Towers, jealousy had already taken its first breath, and fate had begun to write a cruel story in blood and tears. Morning broke over Eco Heights with no gentleness at all. The sun rose harsh and bright, bouncing off glass buildings and car windshields, exposing everything the night had tried to hide. Traffic horns formed a chaotic chorus as commuters rushed toward their daily battles, unaware that within Oduma Towers, emotions were already unraveling. The city moved fast, but inside the Nwoy apartment, time felt thick and heavy. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone as messages poured in from friends and colleagues. Bride-to-be, one text read. Your wedding will shut down the city, said another. She smiled through misty eyes, clutching the phone to her chest as gratitude washed over her. For years she had prayed silently in crowded buses and lonely offices, asking only for love and peace, nothing extravagant. Now that it was finally happening, she feared speaking too loudly, as if joy itself could attract misfortune. Across the hall, Zainab stood before the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with unforgiving eyes. The faint lines on her forehead felt deeper this morning, the weight of comparison pressing down on her like a physical force. She watched herself apply makeup slowly, carefully, as though perfection might mend the ache inside her. Yet no matter how flawless her appearance became, it could not erase the bitterness growing in her heart like a stubborn weed. She remembered the night Amara had announced her engagement. The city had been loud with rain, thunder cracking the sky as Amara laughed nervously, flashing a ring that sparkled under the dim bulb. Zainab had smiled then. Oh, she had smiled so well, but something inside her had shattered quietly, without sound. Since that night, sleep had abandoned her, replaced by restless thoughts and questions she could never answer. In the kitchen, Mama Ifyinanya stirred pap on the stove, her hands shaking slightly as steam clouded her vision. She had sensed the tension for weeks now, the kind that settles into the bones and refuses to leave. She feared for her daughters, feared the silence more than any argument, because silence often hid the deadliest emotions. She whispered a prayer under her breath, asking the ancestors and God alike to protect her family from unseen danger. When Amara stepped into the living room dressed for work, the city seemed to pause for a second. Her simple blue dress hugged her gently, and there was a glow about her that came not from makeup but from hope. Zainab noticed it immediately, and her chest tightened painfully. The glow felt like mockery, like a spotlight shining on everything she believed she had failed to become. "You're leaving early today," Zainab said, her voice calm but hollow. "Yes," Amara replied softly. "My fiancé, Kunal Adeyemi, is meeting my colleagues. He wants to invite them personally." Zainab nodded slowly, each word sinking into her like a blade. Kunal's name echoed in her mind, heavy with meaning. A man from the same city, successful, kind, everything she believed life had denied her. As Amara reached for the door, she hesitated, then turned back. "Sister," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, "I hope someday you'll be happy for me." Zainab forced a smile, thin and brittle. "I already am," she replied, though her eyes told a very different story. The door closed behind Amara with a soft click, but the sound echoed loudly in Zainab's mind. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the empty space her sister had occupied moments earlier. Outside, the city swallowed Amara whole, buses roaring, people pushing, life rushing forward without mercy. Inside, something dark shifted within Zainab's heart, something that would soon refuse to remain silent. And above Eco Heights, beneath the unblinking neon lights, fate leaned closer, listening. The night of the engagement arrived dressed in luxury and noise, the kind only Eco Heights could produce. A rooftop restaurant perched above the city glowed with warm lights, its glass rails revealing traffic like rivers of fire below. Music floated through the air, soft jazz mixed with Afro soul, while waiters glided between tables carrying champagne flutes and carefully plated dreams. To everyone present, it was a celebration. To one soul, it was the beginning of ruin. Amara stepped onto the rooftop holding Kunal Adeyemi's hand, her fingers trembling as if afraid the moment might slip away. She wore a simple emerald green gown that caught the light with every movement, and when Kunal smiled at her, the city itself seemed to blur into the background. He leaned close and whispered reassurances into her ear, promising forever with a sincerity that made her eyes sting. For Amara, this night was proof that love could still bloom even in a city built on survival. Zainab arrived late, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she stepped into the glowing space. Conversations paused briefly as heads turned, drawn by her commanding presence and carefully composed elegance. She smiled, greeting people politely, accepting compliments that felt empty against the roaring noise inside her chest. Each step closer to Amara felt like walking deeper into fire, yet she kept moving, refusing to show weakness. Mama Ifyinanya followed quietly behind her, dressed modestly, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of pride and unease. She watched Kunal greet guests with respect, bowing slightly when he spoke to elders, his laughter genuine and warm. Any mother would be grateful for such a man, yet her heart refused to rest. Something about the way Zainab's smile never reached her eyes made Mama Ifyinanya's spirit tremble. When Kunal finally took the microphone, the city seemed to hold its breath. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion thickening his throat. Eco Heights teaches us to be strong, but Amara taught me to be gentle. Tonight, I ask her to be my wife, and I ask you all to witness this promise." The applause erupted like thunder, echoing across rooftops and into the night sky. Cunnel dropped to one knee. Amara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears streamed freely down her cheeks. The ring caught the light, brilliant, undeniable, real. As Cunnel slid it onto her finger, joy overwhelmed her, and she laughed and cried at the same time, surrounded by cheers and flashing phone cameras. In that moment, she forgot the city's cruelty, forgot hardship, forgot everything except love. Zainab watched it all as though trapped behind glass. The cheers sounded distant, distorted, like echoes underwater. Her hands curled into fists at her sides as memories assaulted her. Men who had promised her rings that never came. Nights she cried herself to sleep asking what she had done wrong. The ring on Amara's finger felt like a verdict passed against her entire life. Someone nudged Zainab playfully. "You must be so proud of your sister." "Yes," she replied smoothly, lifting her glass. "Very proud." She drank deeply, the champagne burning down her throat like truth she refused to face. As the night deepened, laughter grew louder and music faster. Amara danced with Cunnel beneath the open sky, her joy infectious, her smile lighting up every corner she touched. Mama Ifeanyi watched them with tears of gratitude, whispering thanks to God for keeping her daughter alive through years of struggle in the city. But Zainab stood alone near the edge of the rooftop, staring down at the endless traffic below. The lights blurred as tears filled her eyes, though none fell. In her heart, something cracked, quietly, completely. She leaned against the glass railing, feeling the vibration of the city beneath her palms, and made a vow she did not yet fully understand. If happiness can skip me, she thought bitterly, then it should not belong to anyone so easily. Above them, the city continued to glitter, indifferent and unforgiving. And as music and laughter drifted into the night, jealousy took root, not as a passing emotion, but as a living thing, patient and waiting for its moment to strike. Days after the engagement, Eco Heights returned to its usual rhythm: meetings, deadlines, traffic jams, and survival. But for the Moy family, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The apartment in Oduma Towers grew quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Amara moved through the rooms with cautious happiness, careful not to celebrate too loudly, careful not to wound the silence that followed Zainab like a shadow. Amara tried to be gentle with her joy. She cooked dinner more often, humming softly as she stirred pots, hoping the warmth of food might melt the distance between her and her sister. She left small notes on the fridge, "Hope you have a good day," and folded Zainab's laundry when she had the time. Love, she believed, could be patient enough to heal anything. She did not know that some wounds fed on kindness instead of mending. Zainab noticed every gesture, every smile, every ring of Cunnel's name on Amara's phone. She noticed how Amara's laughter came easier now, how she walked lighter, how strangers treated her differently. Each observation tightened the knot inside her chest. She began coming home later, her heels echoing through the hallway long after Mama Ifeanyi had gone to bed, her perfume mixing with the smell of rain and city smoke. At work, Zainab's mind drifted constantly. She stared at spreadsheets without seeing numbers, hearing instead the echo of applause from the rooftop, the sound of Cunnel's voice as he promised forever. Colleagues congratulated her absent-mindedly. "Your sister is lucky." And she smiled with mechanical precision, each word of praise carving deeper into her heart. By evening, resentment clung to her like sweat. Mama Ifeanyi watched her elder daughter with growing concern. She noticed how Zainab no longer joined evening prayers, how she ate little and slept less. One night, she gently knocked on Zainab's bedroom door and sat beside her on the bed, smoothing her hair like she used to when they were younger. "My daughter," she said softly, "do not let the city harden your heart. What is yours will come." Zainab pulled away slowly, forcing a tired smile. "Mama, I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady but distant. "I'm just tired of waiting." Mama Ifeanyi sighed, her heart heavy with worry she could not put into words. She sensed something slipping through her fingers, something fragile and dangerous, but prayer was all she had left to offer. One evening, Amara returned home glowing with excitement. Kunnel had set a wedding date, sooner than anyone expected, and secured a small event hall overlooking the lagoon. She spoke quickly, words tumbling over one another, her hands moving as if painting her future in the air. Zainab listened in silence, her face unreadable, her thoughts darkening with every syllable. "That's wonderful," Zainab finally said, her voice smooth as glass. "You must be very happy." "I am," Amara answered honestly, then hesitated. "I wish you were happy too." The words hung between them, fragile and exposed. Zainab looked at her sister for a long moment, really looked at her. The innocence, the hope, the trust. Something twisted painfully inside her, not just jealousy now, but a sense of betrayal she could not explain. In that moment, love and hatred collided within her, and hatred began to win. That night, Zainab stood alone on the balcony, staring out at the endless city lights. Cars moved like glowing insects below, each carrying someone else's dream, someone else's destination. She gripped the railing tightly, her knuckles white, as a single tear finally escaped and slid down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness alone. It was the quiet birth of something far more dangerous. Behind her, Amara slept peacefully, unaware that the glass city had begun to crack. The rain began without warning, the kind that falls hard and fast, washing the city in silver sheets. Eco Heights glistened beneath streetlights as pedestrians ran for cover, their reflections stretching and breaking across the pavement. In Oduma Towers, the sound of rain tapped insistently against windows, a restless rhythm that echoed the unease settling into the Nwoy apartment. Night arrived early, carrying with it a silence too loud to ignore. Amara sat at the small dining table with her laptop open, finalizing guest lists and seating arrangements. Every few minutes, she paused to rub her temples, overwhelmed but grateful. Kunnel's voice floated from her phone speaker, calm and reassuring as he reminded her that perfection wasn't required, only love. She smiled at the sound of his laughter, feeling steadied by the promise of him, by the idea that someone in this vast city had chosen her completely. In the hallway mirror, Zainab adjusted her coat slowly, watching Amara's reflection instead of her own. The sight stirred something sharp and hot inside her. She remembered being Amara's shield once, walking her home from school, teaching her how to navigate buses and office politics. Now that same sister had stepped into a future Zainab had imagined for herself, and the closeness between them felt suddenly unbearable. Mama Ifyananya moved quietly between rooms, lighting a small candle before the family photo on the shelf. She whispered prayers the way she always had, her voice low and steady, asking for unity, asking for patience, asking for protection. Yet even as she prayed, her eyes lingered on Zainab's tense shoulders, on the way her daughter's jaw tightened, as if bracing for impact. A mother's heart knows when love is being tested beyond its limits. Later that night, the elevator groaned as it descended, carrying Zainab down into the wet, breathing city. She stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, letting it soak her hair and coat as though punishment might quiet her thoughts. She walked past glowing storefronts and shuttered offices, past couples huddled under shared umbrellas, each step echoing with questions she could no longer silence. "Why not me?" the city seemed to ask with her. She stopped beneath a flickering streetlight and leaned against a wall, chest heaving. The rain blurred her vision, or maybe it was the tears she refused to acknowledge. In that moment, envy hardened into resolve, not loud, not dramatic, but cold and deliberate. The kind that waits, that plans, that convinces itself it is only restoring balance to a world that has been unfair. Back at Oduma Towers, Amara closed her laptop and stretched, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the rain. She walked to the balcony, breathing in the cool night air, and whispered a small prayer of thanks. She believed, with the stubborn faith of the hopeful, that love could heal every fracture. Behind her, the city hummed and pulsed, indifferent to belief, patient with darkness. Somewhere between the falling rain and the glowing streets below, a shadow followed too close, quiet, determined, and already moving. The days that followed wore a strange calm, the kind that feels borrowed and temporary. Eco Heights shimmered under clear skies, office towers reflecting clouds like polished mirrors, as if the city itself were pretending nothing was wrong. Inside Oduma Towers, routines continued. Alarm clocks, hurried breakfasts, polite goodbyes. But beneath them ran a current of tension so quiet it almost felt imagined. Almost. Zainab became careful with her emotions, folding them away like fragile clothes she could no longer afford to tear. She laughed at the right moments, offered help with wedding errands, even accompanied Amara to a bridal boutique near the marina. The saleswomen gushed, mirrors multiplied Amara's happiness, and Zainab nodded approvingly, her smile perfect and practiced. No one noticed how her fingers dug into her palms until the pain grounded her again. Amara mistook the change for healing. She held on to it like proof that love was winning, that sisters could stumble and still find their way back to each other. On the drive home, traffic crawling along the expressway, she spoke excitedly about centerpieces and vows, her voice light and hopeful. Zainab listened, offering measured responses, storing every detail with a precision that frightened even her. When the apartment fell quiet, Zainab lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it cut circles through the dark. Thoughts lined up neatly now, no longer wild or chaotic. She replayed conversations, mapped routes, calculated time. The city taught her these skills: how to move unseen, how to wait for the right moment, how to make decisions that looked like accidents. She told herself she was reclaiming dignity, restoring order to a life that had been skipped over. Mama Ifyinanya sensed the stillness and felt no peace in it. She found Zainab one evening sitting alone in the living room. Lights off, the city's glow filtering in through the curtains. "My daughter," she said gently, lowering herself onto the sofa. "Silence can be heavier than shouting. Speak to me." Zainab turned to her with soft eyes and shook her head, offering a quiet hug that left Mama Ifyinanya more unsettled than before. Then came the invitation that shifted everything. Kunal called to say he had booked a private tasting at a newly opened restaurant overlooking the lagoon, a place of glass walls and waterlight reflections, reachable by a short drive through a quieter stretch of the city. "Just the family," he said warmly. "I want us to feel like one before the wedding." Amara's excitement bubbled over as she shared the news, already planning outfits and arrival times. Zainab agreed without hesitation. On the night of the tasting, the city felt suspended between breaths. The roads were lighter than usual, the air cool and clean, the lagoon reflecting the moon like a held promise. Zainab drove with steady hands, music low, her face calm as a still pond. Beside her, Amara chatted happily, unaware that silence had finally chosen its moment to speak. As they crossed the bridge, city lights thinning behind them, Zainab's reflection stared back from the windshield, composed, resolved, unrecognizable. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and told herself one final lie: "This will fix everything." And the city, vast and indifferent, watched them disappear into the glow. The restaurant overlooking the lagoon was a sanctuary above the chaos of Eco Heights, a glass-walled palace where the city's neon heart reflected on rippling water. Outside, traffic buzzed like restless insects, but inside, the world had narrowed to a soft bubble of candlelight and quiet music. Amara's excitement made her heart race. She had never felt so seen, so safe, so radiant. Even the cold glass walls could not dim the warmth she carried like a flame. Kunal stood beside her, gentle and steady. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and the simple gesture made her cheeks burn. "Tonight is for us," he murmured, his voice barely above the soft jazz drifting through the room. Amara nodded, clutching his hand as if the world beyond the glass might try to take this moment from her. She had dreamed of days like this, planned in secret, whispered prayers for them in the middle of crowded city buses. And now, she lived it. Zainab entered shortly after them, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. She wore a tailored black dress, elegant and understated, her hair pulled back into a sharp bun. She looked every bit the accomplished woman she had always wanted to be. But beneath the surface, her mind was a storm. She watched Amara move, watched Kunal smile at her sister, and felt a hollow tightening in her chest. The sound of Amara's laughter, the way her eyes sparkled under the candlelight, it all felt like an accusation she could not escape. Amara greeted Zainab warmly, oblivious to the subtle edge in her sister's silence. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, beaming. Kunal wanted this night to feel like a family moment. Zainab nodded politely, offering a controlled smile, her eyes flicking toward the far corner of the restaurant where shadows pooled. In her mind, she traced every angle of the room, every exit, every opportunity. The city had taught her patience and precision. She had learned to wait for the right moment, and tonight, that lesson had begun to take root. The waiters arrived with the first course, delicate plates of seared fish with citrus glaze, served with an elegant flourish. Amara gasped softly at the beauty of it, lifting her fork with careful reverence. She tasted the food, nodded with delight, and glanced at Cunnel, her eyes glowing with gratitude. "It's perfect," she whispered, smiling. Cunnel's hand brushed hers again, a gentle anchor in the soft, golden light. Zainab, seated across from her, sipped her wine silently, her thoughts dark and meticulous. Each flicker of candlelight reflected in her eyes like a warning. The conversation flowed lightly, polite questions about work, subtle compliments from the restaurant staff, laughter that rippled like wind over water. Amara's voice was bright, weaving happiness into every syllable. Zainab's responses were measured, every word a mask, every gesture calculated. Inside, she cataloged every detail. How Amara's fingers lingered on Cunnel's hand, the way his gaze softened when he looked at her, the tilt of her sister's head when she laughed. Each observation fanned the fire growing inside Zainab, a fire she could not yet name aloud. Cunnel leaned closer to Amara, brushing his lips against her ear. "I can't wait for tomorrow," he whispered softly. "For every day after that." Amara's chest rose and fell, a small laugh escaping her as tears threatened to spill. She felt invincible in this moment, as though love had built a shield around her, protecting her from the city's harsh edges. Zainab watched this scene unfold, feeling every beat like a hammer against her ribs. The word wife struck her like lightning, burning a path through her chest that left a cold, hollow ache. Time seemed to stretch. The next course arrived, tender lamb with a drizzle of reduction, accompanied by roasted vegetables glistening like jewels. Amara and Cunnel shared small bites, exchanging whispers and laughter that seemed to rise above the soft jazz, filling the glass room with warmth. Zainab's fork moved mechanically, her taste buds dulled by the storm within. She felt invisible to the world, yet she had never felt more seen by her own envy, more alive in the shadow it cast. Outside, the city lights reflected endlessly in the lagoon, ripples shimmering like liquid gold. Inside, Amara's joy radiated, infecting everyone around her. Guests complimented her and Cunnel, commenting on the beauty of the venue, the elegance of their attire, the soft glow between them. Amara laughed easily, unaware that Zainab's gaze never left her sister, never blinked, cataloging every move, every smile, every flicker of emotion. Mama Ifyinanya watched from her seat, sensing the tension but unable to name it. Her heart ached in a quiet, maternal way as she saw both daughters here, one glowing with love, the other masking something she did not yet understand. "Pray, my daughters," she whispered under her breath, hoping that whatever darkness lurked would be softened by love and patience. As dessert arrived, delicate chocolate mousse with edible flowers and a drizzle of caramel, Amara leaned back in her chair, glowing with pure happiness. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring not the dessert, but the perfection of the night, the way love had finally arrived. Cunnel reached for her hand, holding it across the table, and the warmth of his touch seemed to cement the moment into eternity. Zainab watched them like a hawk, the quiet that had settled into her heart over weeks, months, years, now hardened into resolve. She smiled again, polite and composed, her eyes reflecting nothing but calm, but inside, a plan was already forming. A plan as precise and patient as the city streets she had learned to navigate, as unstoppable as the tide lapping at the lagoon below. By the time the night drew to a close, Amara was radiant, cheeks flushed with happiness, her eyes shining brighter than the city lights reflected in the lagoon. Cunnel whispered promises into her ear, and she clung to them like a talisman. Zainab, standing silently at the edge of the balcony, felt the last pieces of restraint fall away. The city stretched out beneath them, glittering and oblivious, and she realized something terrifying. The only thing between her and what she wanted was her courage to act. A storm had begun, not of rain or wind, but of something darker, jealousy, envy, and a patient, dangerous desire. And tonight, in the glittering heart of Eco Heights, it was born fully. The drive home from the tasting was silent, except for the quiet hum of the car engine cutting through the warm night air. Eco Heights glowed around them, buildings reflecting the lagoon's silver light, and the city's pulse seemed to match the rhythm in Zainab's chest, steady, patient, and quietly dangerous. Amara hummed softly to a song on the radio, her fingers tapping lightly on the dashboard, unaware that the perfect night was already planting the first seeds of disaster. Zainab kept her eyes on the road, or rather, on the city beyond the windshield. Every streetlight, every shadowed alley, every glowing office window seemed to whisper possibilities. She remembered the years of sacrifice, of waiting, of watching Amara step forward while she was left behind. Each memory hardened her resolve. Her envy, once a dull ache, had sharpened into something precise, deliberate, a tool she would use when the time was right. Amara glanced at her sister, cheerful and trusting. "Zainab, you're so quiet tonight. Aren't you excited for the wedding?" she asked, her voice light, carrying hope like a fragile bird. Zainab smiled, a slow, measured curve of lips that betrayed nothing. "Of course," she said softly. "I'm very happy for you." The words were carefully chosen, polished to perfection, but the tone carried an undercurrent that Amara didn't notice. Inside, Zainab's mind raced, plotting possibilities and outcomes with chilling clarity. She thought of all the small ways life could be turned against Amara, not immediately, but gradually, like water carving stone. A misstep here, a whisper there, a tiny accident no one could trace back. The city had taught her patience, observation, and subtlety. Now, it was time to put those lessons into action. She replayed the night's events in her mind, noting the vulnerabilities, the opportunities. Each smile, each laugh, each whispered word Cunnel had spoken was a pinpoint she could aim at, slowly, meticulously. When they arrived at Oduma Towers, the elevator ride was long and quiet. Amara chattered softly about the food, the music, the beautiful view, but Zainab's mind was elsewhere, on the calculations forming a plan that no one could see. She imagined moving through the apartment with perfect grace, planting doubt, orchestrating misfortune, letting chance and accident do what her hands could not openly accomplish. By the time the doors opened, Zainab had made her first decision. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was a beginning. Inside the apartment, Mama Ifyananya had gone to bed early, sensing her daughter's exhaustion. She murmured prayers into the dark hallway, hoping that all would be well, unaware that shadows had already begun to stir where love once lived. Amara went to her room, carefully placing the small gifts from Kunnel on her bedside table, still glowing with happiness, still believing the world could be kind. Zainab stood at the doorway of the living room for a long moment, the faint light from the street illuminating her sharp profile. She breathed slowly, savoring the calm before action, letting the quiet fill her like a drug. The first seed had been sown, not loud, not violent, but precise. She knew it would grow. It always did. And outside, the city moved on, glittering and indifferent, as if it had already witnessed the beginning of the storm. The city slept fitfully that night, Eco Heights alive with distant sirens and the faint hum of generators. From the darkness of her bedroom, Zainab watched her younger sister move about, oblivious, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering in the very room beside her. Amara was humming softly, arranging gifts from Kunnel on the dresser, her small, delicate hands trembling with happiness. Each movement made Zainab's chest tighten, not with love, not with concern, but with a cold, simmering envy she no longer bothered to hide. Zainab's eyes followed every motion. She memorized the position of each item, the angle of the window ajar for air, the slight draft that swirled through the room, and even the exact way Amara's hair fell across her shoulders. Every detail mattered. Every vulnerability mattered. The envy that had simmered for months was now sharpening into strategy, and Zainab whispered to herself under her breath, "Tonight, I begin." She walked to the living room quietly, stepping lightly on the polished floors as if even the sound of her footsteps could betray her intent. The apartment was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the shadows of the rooms stretched long and strange under the city's streetlights. Zainab's hand grazed the edge of the coffee table, testing her nerves, reminding herself that the city had taught her patience. She did not need to rush. Patience always won. Amara returned to the living room with a glass of water in her hand, smiling softly. Zainab, are you still awake? She asked, unaware of the storm behind her sister's calm face. Zainab turned slowly, smiling, a smile that contained nothing but discipline. I couldn't sleep, she said. I thought I'd check on you, make sure everything is ready for tomorrow. Her voice was honey smooth, carrying a false warmth that masked the malice beneath. Amara laughed lightly, placing the glass down. You're always so thoughtful, she said, touching Zainab's arm. She didn't notice how Zainab flinched slightly at the touch, how her eyes hardened for just a fraction of a second before she forced her warmth back. Zainab nodded and retreated to her bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. But Zainab did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, her mind alive with possibilities. She imagined the wedding, the joyous laughter, Kunnal's gentle presence, Amara glowing in the city lights, and a cold plan began to form in vivid detail. She thought of small accidents, subtle manipulations, the kind that could go unnoticed in a city that never truly sleeps. It would have to be perfect, clean, calculated, untraceable. The envy, the jealousy, the hunger for the life she believed was stolen from her, it all merged into one sharp thought. Amara cannot have this happiness. Hours passed. Rain began to patter softly against the window, a lullaby the city had sung for decades, oblivious to the darkness growing inside one of its own daughters. Zainab sat completely still, staring at the faint reflection of her own face in the window glass. She didn't flinch as the storm outside picked up, wind rattling the building and lightning streaking across the horizon. She only smiled. The first whisper of danger had left her lips, but Amara would never hear it coming. Outside, Eco Heights glittered, alive with thousands of lives moving in oblivion, unaware that tragedy was quietly knitting itself inside the walls of Oduma Towers. The city, indifferent and eternal, watched as a storm that was neither weather nor accident was carefully born in silence. The morning in Eco Heights broke with a deceptive calm. Sunlight glimmered across glass towers, reflecting off puddles from last night's rain, painting the streets in liquid gold. Oduma Towers hummed with life, tenants leaving for offices, drivers honking at impatient traffic, deliveries stacking packages at the lobby. From her apartment, Zainab watched it all with a stillness that belied the storm inside her. Today, she told herself, the first step would be taken. Amara was already in the kitchen, arranging breakfast while humming softly to a song drifting from the radio. She moved with light grace, carrying joy in every gesture. Kunnal had called earlier, reminding her about a final wedding planning meeting that evening, and she was eager to prepare. She glanced at Zainab, hoping to share some excitement. Sister, she said cheerfully, do you want some tea? Zainab smiled, her face calm, her hands folded in her lap. I'll just have coffee, she replied. Her tone was soft, almost tender, but her mind raced. The tea kettle on the counter, the open window letting in the morning breeze, the slight slick of water from the condensation on the glass, all became part of her mental map, a canvas for the plan that had been forming for weeks. As Amara busied herself, Zainab slipped quietly into the hallway, opening a small kitchen cabinet where the cleaning supplies were kept. She pulled out a tiny bottle of highly concentrated bleach, carefully reading the label one last time. She could taste the bitterness in her imagination. Imagine the panic if something went wrong, but she steeled herself. Just a small push. Nothing obvious. A scare, a disruption. She has to understand that happiness is not hers to claim. Amara, unaware of the silent danger, hummed and poured the tea into mugs. I can't believe it's almost the wedding, she said, smiling. Everything is happening so fast. Zainab's smile widened, a perfect mask of sisterly pride. She moved closer, casually knocking over the mug of tea, spilling it onto the floor. Oh, sorry, Amara, she said, lowering herself to help wipe it up. Her voice was soft, friendly, innocent, but as she bent, her eyes caught the sunlight glinting off the edge of the bleach bottle, hidden behind the sink. A shadow of possibility passed across her mind. Amara laughed, brushing the wet floor with a rag. It's okay, Zainab. I'm clumsy sometimes. She didn't notice the small, subtle movements Zainab made, slightly tilting the bleach bottle closer to where it could accidentally spill, subtly arranging the scene so a careless knock could look like misfortune. Every detail was deliberate, every gesture carefully practiced over months of silent envy. The day continued with the city's usual roar outside the apartment, but inside, the tension coiled tighter than ever. Zainab watched her sister move with joy and light, cataloging her every step, memorizing every routine. The first act had been planted, subtle, invisible, a test of her patience and precision. And Zainab knew that when the time came, she would escalate, because jealousy, once fully awake, never sleeps. Amara finally glanced up, smiling at Zainab. "Thanks for helping me, sister. I really appreciate you." Zainab's eyes met hers, sharp and calculating beneath the surface. She nodded, lips curved in the perfect mask of affection. Inside, however, a single thought pulsed steadily. "You will regret your happiness, Amara. I will make sure of it." Outside, Eco Heights glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the danger quietly brewing within one of its towers. The city's chaos carried on, oblivious that tragedy had already set its first, invisible domino in motion. The afternoon sun poured through the glass walls of Oduma Towers, throwing sharp reflections across the living room floor. Outside, Eco Heights moved at its usual frantic pace, cars honking, motorcycles weaving between lanes, vendors calling out in the distance. Inside, the apartment was quiet, deceptively peaceful. But for Zainab, the calm of the city only sharpened her focus. Every movement, every breath of her sister became a point of study. Amara hummed softly while arranging the flowers she had bought for the living room. She paused to admire them in the sunlight, tilting the vase to catch the light. Her hands were delicate, her movements careful, and every instinct told her the day was ordinary, safe. She did not notice the faint layer of tension that clung to Zainab's presence, a tension sharpened by weeks of envy, resentment, and secret plotting. Zainab watched her sister, every detail memorized, the tilt of her head, the flow of her hair across her shoulders, the soft smile she wore so naturally. Her mind raced, calculating, imagining scenarios. The spilled tea earlier had been a test, nothing more, yet it had thrilled her to see how easily the ordinary could be nudged toward chaos. And now, she planned the next step, subtler, more precise, like a shadow sliding along the walls. Amara finally turned to Zainab with a laugh. "Do you want to help me set the table for dinner? Kamal will be here soon to finalize some details about the hall." She expected shared joy, warmth, a moment of sisterly connection. Zainab smiled faintly and nodded, moving with perfect grace, all while rehearsing in her mind the small missteps she could introduce. Tiny accidents that no one could trace, subtle manipulations that could unravel Amara's day without raising suspicion. As they worked, Zainab's thoughts grew darker. She remembered all the time she had been patient, all the years of watching others surpass her, and the quiet rage that had simmered unnoticed by everyone around her. The city had taught her to wait, to observe, to strike when least expected. And tonight, she told herself, she would strike, but not with obvious violence. That would be too easy, too detectable. Instead, she would let fate appear to do the work. Amara, blissfully unaware, laughed again, moving across the living room to adjust the lighting. Zainab's eyes followed her, calculating every step. She imagined a minor accident, a vase tipping, a cut from glass, a slip on wet tiles. Small, subtle, seemingly accidental, but capable of leaving Amara shaken, vulnerable, and dependent. The thought thrilled her with the quiet, dangerous satisfaction of a plan coming to life. Mama Ifyananya, in her room, prayed quietly. She sensed the tension, felt it press against her heart like an invisible weight, but she could not name its source. Mothers often feel storms before they appear, but sometimes, even the strongest prayers are only whispers against the tide of jealousy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the apartment in warm orange and pink light, Zainab's smile became almost imperceptibly sharper. The first cracks had begun, unseen, silent, but the course of everything had changed. Amara's happiness was a fragile bubble, floating above the city she loved so much, and Zainab's envy had begun to pierce it. Outside, Eco Heights glittered and roared, its lights reflecting in the lagoon like scattered stars. The city had no idea that within a single apartment, a darkness had awakened, patient and relentless, waiting for the perfect moment to claim what it believed it deserved. Night had fallen over Eco Heights, the city streets shimmering with neon reflections and the occasional glow of headlights cutting through the darkness. From their apartment in Oduma Towers, the city appeared beautiful, peaceful, almost magical. But inside, the tension had grown dense, thick as the humid evening air. Amara moved about, arranging the last wedding details, humming softly, oblivious to the silent storm lurking behind her sister's calm eyes. Zainab had spent the day watching, waiting, calculating. The spilled tea earlier had been a test. Now, she was ready for her first deliberate act, small enough to seem accidental, precise enough to unsettle her sister without raising suspicion. She moved to the kitchen quietly, opening the drawer where the small bottle of bleach had been hidden. Her hands hovered over it for a moment, savoring the cold thrill of anticipation. Tonight, a little fear, a little chaos, it would be enough. Amara, unaware, stepped onto the wet kitchen tiles near the sink, refilling her glass with water. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across the polished surface, making everything seem softer than it was. Zainab stepped closer, keeping her voice calm and gentle. "Be careful, sister, the floor is slippery," she said with the perfect tone of concern. Amara smiled gratefully, brushing the warning off. She did not see Zainab subtly tilt the small bottle near the edge of the counter, positioning it where a minor nudge could spill the liquid without anyone noticing. Minutes passed. Amara moved back and forth, laughing softly at a text from Kunal, her joy filling the apartment like sunlight. Zainab followed her with eyes cold and calculating. When Amara reached for the cupboard to grab a plate, the bottle tipped ever so slightly. It spilled just enough to make the floor slick. Amara slipped, her hand catching the counter, her heart jumping in shock. She laughed nervously, embarrassed. "Oh my goodness, I almost fell," she exclaimed. Zainab rushed forward instantly, offering a steadying hand. There, Zainab said, her tone full of concern, her smile flawless. "You need to be more careful." Her fingers brushed Amara's, warm and comforting, hiding the truth beneath. Inside, Zainab felt a thrill unlike anything before, the first real taste of control. She had orchestrated chaos so subtly that her sister could not suspect her. A simple slip, a harmless scare, or so it seemed, and yet the effect was immediate. Amara wiped her hands, still laughing lightly, shaking her head. "You're right, Zainab. I should be more careful," she said, never suspecting the deliberate hand that had created the slip. She went on about her preparations, arranging plates and checking the flowers, humming again. But Zainab's eyes followed her, recording every step, imagining the next move, the next accident. Each action, each slip, was now a building block in the plan forming in her mind. The apartment was quiet again, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant pulse of traffic below. Zainab moved to the balcony, staring out at the city, the lights reflecting in her eyes like molten fire. She breathed slowly, savoring the victory of subtle manipulation. Her first act was complete, small, invisible, perfect, and she knew it would only escalate. Above the city, Eco Heights glittered, innocent and oblivious. The first domino had fallen, and no one outside that apartment would suspect how quickly the rest could follow. Inside, Zainab's jealousy had awakened fully, patient and relentless, ready to claim everything her sister had. The following morning, Eco Heights was alive in its usual chaotic rhythm. Traffic honking, street vendors calling, motorcycles weaving dangerously through tight spaces. The city seemed indifferent to the silent storm growing within Oduma Towers. Inside the apartment, the sunlight slanted through the windows, highlighting the dust motes in the air. Amara moved with careful joy, arranging final wedding details on the dining table, humming a soft tune. She believed she was safe, believing in the warmth of her life, unaware of the shadow that followed her every step. Zainab watched from the living room, perched like a predator waiting for prey. Her smile was controlled, polite, but her mind was alive with planning. The slip yesterday had been a small taste of control, a whisper of what she could do. Today, she wanted more. Not overt danger yet. No one must suspect, but a reminder to Amara that life's joy could be fragile, that happiness could be touched and threatened even in the city's safest corners. She followed Amara to the kitchen, offering casual remarks, light questions. "Did you remember to check the hall for tomorrow?" she asked, tone neutral, eyes sharp. Amara nodded, smiling, showing her sister the beautifully detailed checklist she had prepared. Zainab's gaze lingered on every item, on every task, as if absorbing them to use later. Her jealousy had sharpened into strategy. She no longer envied casually. She calculated, plotted, waited. By mid-morning, the apartment seemed normal, but tension vibrated under the surface. Zainab moved to the balcony, glancing at the city below, imagining her life as it could have been if happiness had chosen her first. Then she glanced back at Amara, her chest tightening, envy burning hotter than before. A small thought crept into her mind, dark and patient. One small disruption, nothing permanent, just enough to shake her, make her dependent. Amara laughed softly while arranging flowers, completely unaware. She turned toward Zainab, eyes glowing, and offered a cheerful suggestion. Sister, why don't you help me move the vases over here? I think they'll catch the sunlight better by the window. Zainab approached, pretending to stretch and adjust the vases carefully, but in her mind, she already envisioned the slip of one, the tilt of another. Tiny actions, invisible accidents that could leave Amara startled, unsettled, dependent on her sister's guidance. Mama Ifyananya emerged from her room, sensing the building tension but unsure of its source. Girls, I hope everything is all right, she asked softly. Both daughters smiled, though for different reasons. Amara's was one of trust and joy. Zainab's was a mask, hiding a storm gathering behind composed eyes. Mama Ifyananya shook her head slightly, uneasy but hoping that love would continue to shield her family. The afternoon shadows grew longer, and the city below shimmered in golden light. Zainab moved deliberately, rearranging small items on the table, just so, testing Amara's awareness, her reactions. Each tiny adjustment was a whisper of control, an invisible mark that hinted at her growing power. Amara noticed nothing but the beauty of her preparations, her joy untainted, for now. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows into the apartment, Zainab retreated to her room. She closed the door slowly, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were calm, her face serene, but inside, envy had fully awakened. The first acts had been successful, subtle and unnoticed, and now she was ready to escalate further. The city outside glittered in ignorance, and inside, a darkness was growing, patient, deliberate, relentless. The shadow had taken form. Night had fallen over Eco Heights, the city glittering with lights that danced on wet asphalt, oblivious to the quiet horror forming above it. Inside Oduma Towers, the apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the polished floors. Amara moved about cheerfully, putting finishing touches on wedding preparations, arranging flowers, folding napkins, and reviewing guest lists. She hummed softly, completely unaware that the calm she felt was about to be shattered. Zainab lingered near the kitchen counter, her silhouette blending with the shadows. She had spent the day planning, memorizing every detail of her sister's routine, and now she would execute her first act that could leave real consequences. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to instill fear, a small taste of vulnerability. She picked up the bottle of bleach again, testing the lid, feeling the weight of potential in her hands. Amara called out cheerfully from the living room. Zainab, can you help me bring these flowers closer to the windows? The sunlight tomorrow will make them look perfect in the photos. She walked across the wet kitchen tiles, her bare feet barely touching the floor. Zainab's heart raced. She moved casually, offering help, her hands hovering near the vase arrangement. With a subtle tilt, she nudged one vase just slightly, enough to wobble dangerously on the edge of the counter. Amara gasped lightly as the vase teetered. "Oh, that was close," she exclaimed, steadying it with her hands. Zainab smiled, calm and concerned. "Be careful, sister. You know how slippery the tiles can be." Her voice was soft, sisterly, masking the thrill that coursed through her veins. She watched Amara laugh nervously, unaware that what seemed like a near accident had been orchestrated. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of sirens below. Zainab moved around the kitchen as if tidying, her movements fluid, almost invisible. Her eyes never left Amara. Every gesture was precise, deliberate, designed to cultivate fear while maintaining the illusion of care. She imagined the possibilities, a slip, a fall, a cut. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be traced back to her. Perfect. Amara, still laughing lightly at her near mishap, poured herself a glass of water. Zainab lingered nearby, subtly brushing the edge of the counter, her fingers leaving faint fingerprints near the vase. It was a silent claim, a whisper of control. Her mind raced, already planning the next minor incident, the next small domino to tip. The city beyond the windows roared on, unaware, indifferent. Mama Ifyinanya appeared in the doorway briefly, sensing something amiss but unsure what it was. "Girls, it's late. Be careful," she warned softly. Amara nodded, smiling at her mother's concern. Zainab offered a polite, reassuring smile, masking the storm inside. As soon as Mama Ifyinanya retreated to her room, Zainab's expression hardened, her calm mask slipping just slightly. The first acts had been successful. The first cracks in Amara's perfect life had been made. Outside, the city shimmered like glass in the moonlight, unaware of the danger incubating in one apartment above it. Inside, a silent plan had taken form, precise and patient. By morning, Zainab promised herself, Amara would feel the first true weight of her jealousy. And when that happened, she would be ready for the next step. The shadow had begun its work. The morning light in Eco Heights was deceptively gentle, spilling gold across the streets and reflecting off the glass towers like a promise of safety. But inside Oduma Towers, the air was thick with tension, though no one outside could see it. Amara woke early, humming softly as she began organizing flowers and checking the wedding checklist Kunnel had helped her prepare. Her joy was radiant, a fragile bubble that Zainab had been patiently waiting to puncture. Zainab had spent the night in quiet observation, imagining every step of her sister's morning routine. Today, she would take the first step beyond subtle manipulations. Not death, at least, not yet, but real hurt, enough to instill fear, enough to make Amara doubt the safety she had taken for granted. She moved silently into the kitchen, observing the placement of utensils, the tiles slightly damp from last night's rain, and the carefully arranged items on the counter. Amara, blissfully unaware, moved toward the fridge to grab a glass of juice. Zainab's hands hovered over a small kitchen stool, one she had nudged slightly out of place the night before. She positioned it so that the moment Amara stepped backward, her heel might catch the edge. It was minor, almost imperceptible, but in Zainab's mind, it was perfection, the first act of escalating danger. As Amara reached for the juice, her foot slipped on the slightly wet floor. She stumbled, her hand knocking against the counter. The vase wobbled again, teetering dangerously. Amara gasped, heart pounding, eyes wide in alarm. My foot," she stammered, catching herself against the counter. Zainab rushed forward, offering her hand, face calm, voice soft. "Careful, sister. You'll hurt yourself if you're not careful." Amara laughed nervously, brushing off the near accident. But beneath her laughter, there was a small shiver, a spark of fear she could not place. Zainab smiled, her calm mask perfect, her inner thrill electric. This was more than manipulation. It was power, subtle and silent, leaving no evidence, only unease. She had stepped beyond envy and into action. The rest of the morning passed in quiet tension. Amara moved cautiously, still smiling, still humming, but every step now carried the subconscious weight of yesterday's and today's accidents. Zainab followed, always watching, always cataloging. She imagined a chain reaction, a slip here, a broken vase there, maybe a more serious accident later. Each scenario played in her mind like a carefully directed film. Mama Ifyinanya entered the kitchen, sensing the unease in the apartment. "Girls, what's happening? Why does it feel heavy in here?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. Amara reassured her mother, laughing lightly. "Nothing, Mama. Just a few slips, that's all." But Zainab's smile remained, a small, hidden triumph. The first real cracks had appeared in Amara's life, and the foundation of her happiness had been tested. Outside, the city continued unaware. Eco Heights dazzling in the morning light, people rushing to offices, the world spinning on its indifferent axis. Inside, a shadow moved with purpose, patient and relentless. By the time the day ended, Zainab knew she had taken the first step toward reshaping her sister's life. The jealousy had become action, and action had taste, bitter, intoxicating, and unstoppable. The afternoon in Eco Heights carried a false sense of calm. Cars snaked through the streets, horns blared, and the hum of the city's life created a constant backdrop of normalcy. But inside Oduma Towers, a more dangerous rhythm had begun, one orchestrated by Zainab, silent and deliberate, as she wove the first threads of a web that would entangle Amara completely. Amara staggered near the balcony, her heart pounding, breath uneven. She turned toward Zainab, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Zainab, something isn't right," she whispered. Zainab stepped closer. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes burned with years of swallowed jealousy. For the first time, she did not pretend. "You were never supposed to have this life before me," she said quietly. Amara frowned, not understanding. "What are you saying?" Zainab's hand rested gently on Amara's back, soft, sisterly, familiar. For a brief moment, Amara relaxed, trusting her. Then Zainab pushed. Not violently, not screaming, just enough. Amara gasped as her foot slipped completely. Her hands clawed at the air, nails scraping the balcony rail. Zainab stood frozen, watching. She did not reach out this time. Her face showed no shock, only cold resolve and buried rage. Amara's body tipped backward. As she fell, her eyes locked with Zainab's. Eyes filled not with anger, but betrayal and disbelief. The sound of her body hitting the ground below echoed like thunder. Silence followed. Zainab stepped back slowly, her breath shaking. The city continued to glow behind her, uncaring, unforgiving. At that exact moment, Amara's spirit rose, standing behind Zainab on the balcony, unseen, watching her killer breathe. But inside the apartment, the air had changed. It was no longer air. It was weight. It pressed against the walls, against the furniture, against Zainab's chest as she lay awake on her bed, staring at the ceiling without blinking. Sleep refused to come. Every time Zainab closed her eyes, she saw it again. The balcony, the push, the look on Amara's face when trust shattered into terror. She turned on her side, then the other, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, as if fabric could protect her from memory. Her heart beat too loudly in her ears, each thud sounding like a knock from the other side of the world. Then the room grew cold. Not the ordinary chill of night, but a sudden, unnatural cold that crawled along the floor and climbed the walls like a living thing. Zainab's breath came out in thin white clouds. The curtains by the balcony stirred though the windows were closed. Somewhere in the apartment, a soft sound echoed, tap, 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 like bare feet on tile. Zainab sat up slowly, her mouth dry. "Hello?" she whispered, though she already knew no one living would answer. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. In the reflection of the dark television screen, Zainab saw a shape that was not there before. A faint outline, a presence standing just beyond her line of sight. Her blood turned to ice. She did not want to turn around, but something stronger than fear pulled her head, inch by inch, toward the balcony. There, near the glass door, a glow began to form. Soft at first, like moonlight trapped in smoke. Then clearer, human, familiar. Amara stood there, not as she had been in life, bright and laughing, but not as a monster either. She wore the white wedding dress she had never lived to walk down the aisle in. It was torn at the hem, stained dark where life had left her body. Her feet did not touch the floor. Her hair floated gently around her face as if underwater. Her eyes were open. They were not burning with rage. They were worse, filled with sorrow so deep it felt ancient, bottomless. Betrayal lived there. Confusion, a question that had no answer. Zainab slid off the bed and fell to her knees without realizing it. Her lips trembled violently. "Amara," she breathed. The name seemed to awaken the spirit fully. Amara's head tilted slowly, the way she used to when she was thinking. The room responded to her presence. The walls creaked, the air thickened, and the temperature dropped further. "I trusted you," Amara's voice said, not loud, not angry. Soft, broken. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing inside Zainab's bones rather than her ears. Zainab shook her head violently, tears spilling freely now. "I didn't mean it. I didn't think. You thought," the spirit replied. "You watched." As Amara spoke, memories flooded the room. The balcony appeared again, not physically, but spiritually. Zainab saw herself as she truly was that night, calm, silent, unmoving. She watched herself push, watched herself stand still as her sister fell. Zainab screamed and covered her face. "Stop, please." The air pulsed. The wedding ring on Amara's ghostly finger glowed brighter, humming softly like a distant drum. In African belief, a soul wronged by blood does not cross easily. It lingers. It waits. It remembers. "I died twice," Amara said. "Once when I hit the ground, and once when I realized it was you." The apartment shook. A picture frame fell from the wall and shattered. The curtains flew open, though there was no wind. Zainab crawled backward on the floor, her nails scraping the tiles, her eyes locked on the figure she could not escape. "What do you want from me?" Zainab sobbed. Amara's spirit drifted closer, her face inches away now. Zainab could see every detail. The tears frozen on her ghostly cheeks, the crack in her soul where love had been murdered. "I want you to remember," Amara said. "Every night, every breath, the way I remembered you when I was falling." The light around her dimmed suddenly. The cold eased. The presence began to fade. Just before disappearing, Amara spoke one final sentence, her voice calm but final. "This is only the beginning." The room returned to silence. The city noise crept back in through the windows as if nothing had happened. Zainab lay curled on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, her screams trapped in her throat. She knew, with terrifying certainty, that Amara had not come for peace. She had come for revenge. Morning came to Oduma Towers, but it did not bring relief. The sun rose over Eco Heights, painting the glass buildings in gold. Traffic resumed its familiar chaos, and the city pretended nothing had happened. Inside the apartment, however, darkness still lingered, clinging to the walls like a curse that daylight could not chase away. Zainab sat on the living room floor where she had collapsed the night before. Her eyes were swollen, red from crying, her body stiff as if fear had carved her into stone. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Amara's voice again, soft, broken, accusing. The words, "I trusted you," echoed endlessly in her mind, growing louder with each heartbeat. She slowly rose to her feet and looked around the apartment. Everything seemed normal at first. The sofa, the dining table, the curtains gently moving. But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The wedding fabric Amara had folded so carefully lay scattered across the floor, twisted and torn, as though invisible hands had dragged it apart in anger. Zainab's chest tightened. "No, no, this can't be happening," she whispered. She bent down to pick up the fabric, but before her fingers touched it, the lights flickered violently. The television switched on by itself, filling the room with static. From within the noise, a faint sound emerged, a woman sobbing. Soft, familiar. Zainab screamed and stumbled backward, knocking into the coffee table. The sobbing stopped instantly. The TV went black. Silence returned, thick and mocking. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would tear through her chest. She rushed into the kitchen, desperate for distraction, desperate to escape her own thoughts. As she reached for a glass of water, the tap turned on by itself. Water poured out forcefully, splashing onto the floor, spreading across the tiles just like the night Amara fell. Zainab froze, staring at the water as her knees trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The water stopped suddenly. Behind her, a chair scraped loudly across the floor. Zainab spun around. No one was there, but the chair had moved. Slowly, deliberately, as if someone had pushed it. Her breathing became shallow. "Amara, please." "I said I'm sorry," she cried, tears streaming freely now. A cold wind swept through the apartment, though all the windows were shut. The smell of blood and rain filled the air, the same smell from the night of the fall.
From that night onward, Zainab no longer lived alone. Days passed, but time lost its meaning. Morning and night blurred together, stitched by fear and exhaustion. Zainab stopped going to work, she stopped answering calls. The world outside her apartment continued to move, but she remained trapped inside a prison built from memory and guilt. Every mirror in the apartment betrayed her. When she passed them, she no longer saw only her reflection. Sometimes, just behind her own eyes, Amara's face would appear silent, watching, waiting. Zainab began covering the mirrors with cloth, but even then, she felt their gaze burning into her skin. At night, the dreams came. She dreamed she was falling endlessly through darkness, her sister's voice echoing above her. She woke up screaming every time, clutching her chest, her sheets soaked with sweat. When she turned on the light, she often found wet footprints leading from the balcony to her bedside. She never followed them again. One evening, as rain poured heavily over Echo Heights, Zainab sat curled on the sofa, rocking back and forth. Thunder rolled outside, but the storm inside her was louder. She whispered prayers she barely remembered, calling on God, on ancestors, on anything that might listen. The television switched on by itself. A news broadcast filled the screen, the same report from the night Amara died. The anchor's voice echoed through the room, calm and distant. Authorities have ruled the incident an accidental fall. Zainab screamed. It wasn't an accident. The screen changed. Now it showed the balcony from above clearer than any camera should have captured. Zainab watched herself again, placing her hand on Amara's back. She watched the push. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing violently. "Stop it! Please." The screen went black. The air grew cold. Amara's voice returned, no longer gentle, no longer sorrowful, steady, unwavering. "You let them call it an accident," the voice said. "You let the world lie." The walls began to close in, not physically, but spiritually. Zainab felt her chest tighten, as if invisible hands were squeezing her heart. She gasped, clutching at her throat, tears streaming freely. "I'll confess," she cried again. "I swear I will." Silence followed, then laughter, soft, broken, familiar. Amara appeared near the doorway, her spirit darker now, her wedding dress stained deeper, her eyes reflecting a calm cruelty that terrified Zainab more than rage ever could. "Confession does not bring peace," Amara said. "It only brings truth." Zainab crawled toward her sister, reaching out desperately. Her hands passed through Amara's form like smoke. "Why are you doing this to me?" Zainab sobbed. Amara looked down at her with eyes full of ancient sadness. "Because I had no mercy," she replied. "And neither did you." Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of wedding music, slow, distorted, turning into funeral drums. The lights pulsed with each beat. Zainab screamed as the sound grew louder, hammering into her skull. "Make it stop," she cried. Amara's voice cut through the nose, final and absolute. "You will live. But you will never rest." The music stopped. The spirit faded once more, leaving the apartment cold and silent. Zainab lay on the floor for hours afterward, staring at the ceiling, her mind shattered. She finally understood the depth of her punishment. Death would have been an escape. Living with what she had done was the true sentence. Outside, the rain washed the city clean. Inside, Zainab remained uncleaned by time, haunted by a sister who refused to be forgotten. Dawn crept slowly into Oduma Towers, thin streams of pale light slipping through the curtains like hesitant witnesses. The city of Echo Heights woke up as it always did, horns blaring, engines roaring, people rushing toward lives untouched by what had happened in that apartment. But for Zainab, morning brought no relief. Only another day of breathing with a broken soul. She sat on the balcony floor, her back pressed against the cold glass, knees drawn tightly to her chest. She had not slept, her eyes were hollow, her face drained of life. The place where Amara had stood the night before still felt heavy, as if the air remembered her. Zainab stared over the railing, down at the concrete far below. The city looked smaller from here, quieter. The same edge where everything had changed now whispered to her again, not with words, but with memory. "I understand now," Zainab said softly, her voice barely carrying. "I understand what I did." A gentle breeze moved through the balcony. The temperature dropped. Amara appeared one last time. Her spirit was calmer now, lighter, no longer flickering with anger or sorrow. The torn wedding dress shimmered faintly, and her eyes, once filled with pain, now held something else, closure. "You wanted my life," Amara said, her voice soft but steady. "Now you will live yours, without peace." Zainab looked up, tears rolling freely. "Is there nothing I can do?" Amara studied her sister's face for a long moment. In that silence lived all the memories of childhood, laughter, shared secrets, and love that jealousy had destroyed. "There is nothing left to take," Amara finally replied. The city nose faded. Even the wind seemed to pause. Amara stepped closer to the balcony edge, her feet hovering where Zainab's hand had once pushed. She turned back once more, her expression unreadable. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "But forgiveness is not freedom." With that, her spirit slowly rose into the morning light, dissolving into the sky above Echo Heights. The cold lifted, the weight vanished, the presence was gone. Zainab screamed, not in fear, But in loss, she reached out, but there was nothing left to touch. The apartment felt empty for the first time. Days later, Zainab turned herself in. The truth came out. The city buzzed with shock, outrage, and sorrow. The story of the jealous sister spread like wildfire, becoming a warning whispered in homes and streets alike. Zainab did not jump, she did not escape. She lived, and every night, when sleep finally came, she dreamed of a balcony, a sister's eyes, and a single moment that destroyed everything. In Neko Heights, the lights still shine bright. But some souls, once broken by jealousy, never find peace again. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.